Okay, so let's get straight to it. I think the main thing we were trying to point out with these videos is regardless of which DAW you use, almost which GGD library you use, you're going to be able to get a really great sound if you focus on getting great performances and great source tones in the first place. And that stock plugins, however basic they may be, and in terms of how they look and so on and so forth, you can still get really, really great sounds. Across this whole mix, I'm just using Avid, pretty much EQ3 and channel strip across the board, with a reverb plugin, a distortion plugin, and that's pretty much it. Also this Maxim limiter, but the point being is that you really can do a lot with very little and very basic tools. In terms of GGD, each of our libraries has a unique sound in terms of the studio it's recorded in, performances, so on and so forth, but all of them kind of go through what we think to be really, really great raw sounds in the first place. So I'm just going to kind of take away everything on this mix. And I will say that obviously the guitars, bass, and drums are balanced with the processing, but I'm just going to try and show you basically how much of mixing in general just comes from balancing things properly and just using your ears and kind of making those artistic or subjective changes which will make it your mix rather than someone else's. So first off, let's take a listen to these drums with no processing. I will add that I'm using 2 grooves from the Brody Simpson MIDI pack. Thanks to him for all the groove on this track. Great, punchy, lively sounding drums. As you can see, I've balanced the mics in Contact as I send them out into Pro Tools. Each one of these is an auxiliary channel. I balanced these mics to how I felt suited the track, things that I know will help in terms of my processing. For example, having very little of the kick in the far room and near room mics, and then other things like taking down the bottom mic of the snare drum, toms again, taking some of the far room mic out, and so on and so forth. These are kind of decisions which I made just because I was looking for kind of like a pretty punchy, modern sounding drum sound. So before I look at each of the individual channels, I'm just going to show you some pretty basic moves going here on EQ3, taking out some of the subs, adding a lot of the highs, cutting out what I would say were just some kind of like muddy mid frequencies and maybe just something a little bit harsher here, and then adding some low end with that small boost there. Compression, it's so light it may not even really be doing anything until the full mix is going on, but you'll hear it. This is more out of, I suppose, I would normally use an SSL 2-bus processor, and that is adding harmonic and saturation characteristics which you won't get from these more basic plugins, but nonetheless it works. It's not necessarily going to win you a Grammy, but for the sake of writing, demoing, and making music, these plugins will definitely do. And then we lastly have this limiter, so let's have a quick listen to that. So already things sound a lot better than they did purely just from loudness. Getting quite a big difference just between having this limiter on or off. Next we're going to have a look at the processing on the parallel, trash and reverb buses. Again, nothing crazy going on here. I've seen this plugin probably for the best part of 15 years. I can't remember the last time I used it. Does it sound good? Yes, it does sound good. Happily surprised by how great all of these different various plugins sound. Adding some aggression with this distortion plugin, and then Deverb, which is an absolute classic, all the way from the late 90s to early 2000s. I think metal drum mixes owe a lot to this plugin. So I'm sending the kick, snare, and mainly the other shells, a little bit of the room, over to the parallel compressor, which definitely adds a lot of weight and thickness to the drums. Just gonna add back, actually, yeah, we'll add all the processing back in on the drums so you can hear the drums soloed with processing. Sounds pretty cool. You may have seen that I switched on this bus 13, which is purely just sending the snare top mic to control the sidechain of the expander, so that it basically gets louder. The near room gets louder when the snare is hit, so you get more of that kind of explosive sound. I'm not too sure how useful it is, to be honest with you, to go through all the individual moves that we've got going on here, but you can kind of see that I'm doing the majority of the work all in this one plugin. It has a gate, it has a compressor, it has an EQ, and yeah, it's just kind of so let's just have a quick look through these plugins to see the various kind of moves that I've made. Some of them may not make that much sense out of context, but I think once you hear them all together, it kind of works in the way that it should. So here we have a lot of the mids taken out, small boost on the top end, little boost here at 65 Hertz. That's for the kick. Just take out the parallel, so you can see that's adding quite a lot of volume and weight. And then we have the snare. Similar kind of moves, filtered out some of the extreme lows and extreme highs, added a healthy amount of top end there, and again, kind of like carving out some of these mids and adding a little bit of weight there. You may notice I'm also processing the snare top and bottom together. That's just something that I personally prefer to do, specifically for this style of music. The toms have very similar processing across the board. We have this EQ move, which is adding a little bit of top end, carving out quite a lot of the mids there, and then also filtering quite a lot of the low end out, which is more important, I would say, on the floor toms than it is on the higher tom, but you can see those things kind of shift as you go. I would say that the toms without any EQ sound totally fine. Just stylistically, I didn't really necessarily feel it was the right thing for this track. So let's have a quick listen to. So it's a lot of attack on that. Sounds cool, I guess. I think it sounds better in the context of the mix, but I think you need to kind of hear some of these sounds with the room sounds, for example, rather than just hearing them out of context. Sometimes you can go and get a little bit lost when you do that. So again, here is the drum sound with all processing turned on, including the master bus. Cool. Let's move on to the bass track. So I have two channels, one which is adding all of the kind of grit and distortion, and another one which I'm using the DI to add some subs and lows. You can see that I've done that by filtering out all of the low end on the grit track, and then the opposite on the DI. Small amount of compression going on. More compression. This is more aggressive compression on the DI, and then limiting and then some further EQ moves which encompass both these channels and busing them to here, taking out more of the kind of like muddy frequencies in the middle. Again, taking out some of the extreme subs, adding a little bit of low end, adding a bit of attack through that. And then we have some compression going on. You may be asking why I use this EQ and not the EQ in here. It was just as the process of the mixing happened, different things occurred. And then we have this limiter. So let's have a quick listen to the bass tone with all those things turned on, and then I will show you. Actually, let's listen to all of this initially, everything turned off. Sounds okay, not great, and then let's turn that on. I would say that this bass sound is serving more of a purpose against the guitars, which we'll take a listen to. Turn on the 7-band here. We've got various different moves going on, which I'll show you specifically what's happening. So starting off with the high pass filter, low pass filter, adding a little low end, cutting some mids, cutting some of that annoying frequency around there. A little bit more of annoying frequency going on there. And then you'll see I added this single band EQ just to notch out this frequency. Let's have a listen. Cool, and then the guitars and bass together. And then everything as one. So there we have it. Pretty decent mix going on. I would say it would definitely suffice for a demo or a songwriting session or whatever it may be to kind of get everyone pumped on what they're hearing. I think I'm using maybe 5 plugins in total, the majority of the work done by the channel strip and the EQ3. I think part of the reason we wanted to do these videos to show all the various different DAWs and how they work with just the stock plugins was to show you that you have a lot of powerful sounds purely from just the source tones that you get in the first place. I would say that source tones and performance together will make a bigger difference than buying, you know, the most expensive plugins in the world. That's not to say that those plugins don't add a great amount of value, and at times when I was mixing this, I was definitely missing certain kind of characteristics that I'd be looking for, which I'm sure Misha and Nolly also did during their mixing sessions. But the point is you don't need them, and it gives you a greater understanding of when you do need them and making those mix decisions when you do make them.